Welcome to AP Environmental Science. In this video, we are going to talk a little bit about the theory of island biogeography, and this is discussed quite detailed in Module 21 of your textbook. The theory of island biogeography is the study of ecological relationships and the distribution of organisms on islands and of these organisms' community structures. But it's not just islands that we're looking at. We really are identifying any kind of isolated location as being an island, and we'll talk more about that later. The theory of island biogeography was developed by this guy by the name of E.O. Wilson, and that's his picture right up here. He was the first person to use this term biodiversity. So bio meaning living, diversity meaning this variety of all things on Earth. And he coined that term because he really wanted to inspire people not only to think about all these variety of living things, but really to inspire them to want to study the living things around them and to take care of it, which is a little ironic thinking about how he developed this theory of island biogeography. Now, he did this by studying small mangrove islands off of the Florida Keys. And when I say small, they're really not all that big. They are quite small, and they're actually pictured in this image here on the screen. And what he did is he went out to these islands and he measured the size of the island, so the area of the island. He also measured how far that island was from other islands and how far they were from the mainland. Then what he did is he made a record or recorded all of the biodiversity that was found on that island. So he recorded all the insects and all the plants and all the animals. Then what he did is he built these scaffolds around it, hung these tarps, and hired an exterminator. Yeah, the exterminator, the same guy that you call when you have an infestation of spiders in your house. That guy came out to the island and fumigated it and killed off all of the fauna, so all of the living critters, like all the ants and insects and little creepy crawlies and all of that. Then, once it was completely barren of all things other than plants, Wilson went out to the island every day and recorded what living things came back to the island and how much biodiversity returned. And that's what this graph is right here. So you can see the islands that were further away from the other islands or from the mainland, those were the ones that had fewer species return than the islands that were closest to the mainland or other islands. And that got him thinking, and he started to look at the size of the islands as well in relationship to each other. And that's where this theory of island biogeography really got going. And you can see that in this diagram here. We have the A and the B on the bottom, and you can see that distance from the mainland, Island 1 and Island 2. If Island 2 is further away from the mainland, it's going to be harder for species to get there to colonize that island, so there will be less biodiversity. Same thing if Island 1 and 2 are the same distance from the mainland, but Island 1 is smaller than Island 2. The bigger island is going to have more biodiversity. Now, E.O. Wilson did a lot of math here, and he did a bunch of statistical analysis on the data that he collected, and he found these really consistent trends happening. And that is what you see in the graph right here. So you can see that you pick one blue line and one green line, and where those two lines intersect, if that two lines is farther to the right, you're going to see more biodiversity. If the two lines intersect further to the left, there is going to be less biodiversity. So it's really just a relative number in comparison to each other. Now, island biogeography plays a pretty significant role in evolution. So many island species are actually specialist species that only live in a particular niche, and invasive species tend to be more generalist. So these island species, they became specialists because there's not as much variety of food, territory, and other resources on the island. So they have to develop these special abilities in order to survive there. Now, the long-term survival of these specialist species may be jeopardized if we have invasive species come in, because those invasive species tend to be generalist, meaning they can survive in a wide variety of habitats and they don't require such a specialized niche in order to survive. An example of this is the dodo bird. Now, the dodo bird evolved with no natural predators, and when invasive species were introduced to the island, there was a huge amount of extinction happening because these dodo birds were not able to compete with these generalist species that were being brought in. So eventually, dodo birds went extinct. But again, not all islands are islands. E.O. Wilson studied islands, those little mangrove islands, because they were a really great way to isolate a particular location. He could have done the exact same experiment looking at alpine zones or ponds or isolated forests. Now, it would have been much, much more difficult to isolate that particular location, to do the extermination and do the counting, but it would be possible. And the reason why the theory of island biogeography is so important in our study of ecology is because there's been a lot of habitat destruction, and we've actually created a bunch of man-made islands throughout the world because we have knocked out entire swaths of habitat. So in summary, island biogeography is that study of relationships and the distribution of organisms on islands, really just comparing where do we have more biodiversity versus less, where is it more likely to happen. Also, make sure you understand that islands are colonized by organisms arriving from somewhere else. We don't just have spontaneous generation of new organisms happening on the islands. It just doesn't work like that. And many island species have evolved to become specialist species, and when you have an invasive species come in, which is typically a generalist, that can have some significant negative impacts on the native island species. Again, if you have any questions or concerns or comments about the information that was in this video lecture, please make sure to send those along to me, and I hope that as you watch this video, you were able to learn something.